yourself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on that thought.
Hi, welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. It is a pre-recorded show. Feel free to use the chat, but we won't see any of your questions today. But it's a big welcome back to the show to Ben Jacobs. How are you, Ben?
Steve, I'm good. The pre-record still should allow people to call me a Qatari stooge if they wish, but thankfully I won't see it in real time. So even more reason to slag me off because I won't be offended because, as you say, we're in a pre-record. But I'm good, thanks. And
good stuff, mate. Always good to have you on the show and hear what you've got to say about Newcastle United. And I thought with it being a pre-recorded show, with me having a week off the lives, that it would be nice to look back on the first 6 months of the new ownership. And, of course, 7th of October is a date that's ingrained in Newcastle United's fans' minds from, that amazing takeover when Mike Ashley was cast into the history books and PIF, Mirdad Amanda and Jamie Rubin arrived on the scene. And it's been an interesting time. And I just wanted you to give us your opinion, first of all, on the new owners. How do you think that they've set about this task?
I think that given the circumstances of when they took over and how quickly it happened, they've done fantastic. And the most important thing was to be short-termist to begin with and not get ahead of themselves. And the two things that they've done is kept Newcastle up, in my opinion, or got close enough that the Magpies are at least huge favourites now to avoid the drop, and reconnected with the fan base. And those were really the only two goals on the field, to get Newcastle out of trouble and partially to use the transfer window to do that with some sensible signings, and then to make sure that there was a feel-good factor behind the club again. And that connection with the fan base was, on the one hand, easy in the sense that there was so much distaste for Mike Ashley and so much excitement around the potential of this takeover that there was always going to be an immediate buzz. But they had a lot to do nonetheless in terms of being as open as they could, finding a new manager, navigating a transfer window at short notice, getting wins. And let's not forget, everyone wrote Newcastle United off around the Christmas period. And then by early February or so, they were out of the relegation zone and people were looking up rather than down. So they've not done that much wrong. My impression is that they've been quite slow and they've made sure that they've walked before they can run in terms of some of the more brand decisions or business decisions. So we've seen a lot around the football and a lot around the fan base, and not as much around the commercial side or the brand or the longer term plans. And I think that they'll wait to do that until the summer. There's been one trip, of course, to Saudi Arabia. Newcastle are training in the Middle East at the moment, in the UAE as well, but that's not as significant because Eddie Howe at Bournemouth would always go to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, so it's just warm weather training during an international break. But the first trip was obviously significant to kind of test the water and get Newcastle United out there. But generally speaking, I think that the fans can be happy on and off the field. And then my only question would be, over time, at what point are we going to hear more directly from PIF? At what point is Yasser Al-Rumayyan going to engage with the fan base and the media as well? And when are we going to see a scenario where the majority owner takes more of a visible role in the club? I think behind the scenes, they're very engaged, and we might get a scenario much like Abramovich at Chelsea before all of this fallout due to the war in Ukraine. We may get an eventuality where they just never do it. And that's what Abramovich did. He's largely still loved by the Chelsea fan base, but when did he ever do media interviews? When did he ever talk directly to the fans? When did he ever lay out things in the first person rather than putting things through Bruce Buck? And PIF might take that approach. But I think given how much that T word, transparency, was spoken about in the build up to this takeover, getting the green light, that is the one thing that's missing. And the next stage for me, to give them a sort of 10 out of 10 in terms of their 6-month grade card, or an A+ rather than a sort of 8.5 or 9. That one thing that's missing is that direct engagement from PIF. But other than that, given the circumstances, I think they couldn't have done much more.
It's interesting that, because I never really gave that much thought. Obviously, PIF are the majority shareholders, but Amanda and Mirdad are there to do that job and have done it, particularly well, I've got to say. Do you think PIF will come forward, or do you think they will stay in the background? What's your honest gut opinion?
I think because of the war in Ukraine, they won't come forwards at this particular juncture, solely because there's so much scrutiny around Saudi Arabia that they open themselves up. And rightly to some extent, because these questions do have to be answered and football should shed some limelight on it. But they definitely open themselves up if this is the first time they come forward to being grilled around the recent 81 beheadings in Saudi Arabia, or links again with Mohammed bin Salman, things that they want to put a bit of distance between themselves, Newcastle United Football Club, and the current political climate that we're in. And I think that's maybe why they'll have a bit more reticence at this particular juncture. And also, we're still heading towards the end of the season and nothing is mathematically certain at this point. And I think that if you look at it from the perspective of PIF, when they do engage with the fans, they'll probably have to engage with the media at the same time. And at that point, I think they'll want a little bit of both certainty and lull, the certainty of the end of a season and safety, and the lull of having an off season, at which point they can talk more forward looking and strategically. But right now, if Yasser Al-Rumayyan comes forwards, then the fan base will naturally want to know, what are you going to spend and how big are your ambitions? But the media at the same time will want to know about human rights and whether or not they believe they should be sanctioned due to the war in Yemen, or due to the beheadings that I mentioned, or due to the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. And again, Newcastle fans will say that's unfair. Why are they being directly linked? They've already proven that they've got no government links and so on. But you just can't have a scenario where someone like Yasser Al-Rumayyan, regardless of separation, if he comes forwards now, he will simply be asked about those things. And the reason I know that for sure is because I was in Saudi Arabia pretty much 2 months after the killing of Khashoggi, and Yasser Al-Rumayyan, with no huge prominent global links or reputation at that point, came to a modest golf press conference as the president of the Saudi Golf Association to launch a golf tournament. And there was a select group of probably 10 Western media there, myself included. And for half an hour, he was asked about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. And whether that is fair or unfair, I don't think it's worth going into at this point, because we know how polarized the Newcastle fan base is on this issue. But my point is just, if you're PIF, the timing of when you first come forwards is really important. So I don't think that there'll be that much of a visible voice or presence between now and the end of the season. It wouldn't surprise me if Yasser Al-Rumayyan visits another game, perhaps the last home game of the season. But then in the off season, I think they will do something either through the fan base or through the club. And then again, I think they'll take a back seat, because as you rightly say, the structure of the football club is effectively to have Amanda, football, Jamie, business, PIF, brand. And it's not quite that clear cut or quite that simple. And there are naturally overlaps between each of these areas. But in essence, PIF are trusting the Reuben brothers and Staveley to run the football club, and in the long run to find other executives to come in and do that, and to appoint a manager, or at least recommend on a manager, and to get in, as they've already done now, a director of football. And all of those decisions are signed off by PIF, but the day-to-day is not their remit. And PIF's role from a distance is to build the brand, to tie the brand with Saudi Arabia, and to find investment, and ultimately turn Newcastle into a global superpower on and off the field. So there is very defined roles, and for PIF to facilitate their role, even as majority owner, they don't necessarily have to be in Newcastle every day. They don't have to justify what they're doing. They don't have to show their faces to the fan base or the media. They just have to ensure that the club is loved and looked after, and that other people are taking care of that day to day. And the only nagging doubt in my mind is that if this has all been about transparency, then at some point, I think it is only fair that PIF come forwards to both the fan base and the media.
Mirdad has really stepped forward, to the plate with social media. It has to be said. There's been lots of interaction with supporters from Jamie Rubin as well. Of course, Amanda Staveley isn't on Twitter. Twitter, of course, is a big social media platform for football supporters.
She's not Kate Stewart.
No, she's not Kate Stewart. I've met Kate Stewart. She's definitely not Amanda. But yeah, I mean, I think that's been a positive. It's all right when things are going well, but let's be fair. Things weren't going well in Eddie Howe's first few games, and we'll come to that. But from my perspective, I think it's great to see them interact. And there's been some stories which have come out from supporters where Mirdad's inboxed them or Jamie's inboxed them. We've seen the support of the food bank, which is an easy win. But we've seen them tackling personal issues. We've seen them meeting supporters. They become celebrities, which is what happens in Newcastle. London, of course, you can walk around the streets and no one bothers you. Newcastle, as Jermaine Jenas once said, is a bit like a goldfish bowl. But, they've grasped it, they've absorbed it, and they are using it for positivity. And I think the social media is very important at this point. What's your thoughts on how they've handled the social media onslaught from Newcastle fans?
Yeah, it's an onslaught in a very positive way. And like you say, they're in a kind of honeymoon period, especially because of that string of results, giving them a bit of breathing space between relegation and themselves. And what you hope, and we've seen no evidence otherwise, is that it's authentic and it's long-term. And if they continue to use social media in this way, it makes a massive difference, because not only is it very genuine and allows that direct connection, but at the same time, it's the polar opposite from the entire Mike Ashley era. So they're again showing change. And it's such an easy win for them. And it's such a little thing to do, to say, thanks for your support, or that was a great result, or to post a photograph of them at the ground, or to show you something from the dressing room that you wouldn't normally see. And it's not just them either. I think that Newcastle's social media deserves a lot of credit too, because more so than in the Ashley era, and it might have something to do with, again, this more positive string of results, bar the last two late defeats and games against Chelsea and Everton. But before that, the club's channels are a little more loose, and they're going more directly to players and allowing them that platform to speak. And all of this is very positive for me. And what makes it so refreshing is that we had so long, probably 18 months or at least a year before the takeover was completed, but you can add the Ashley era. So then you can effectively be talking about 7 or 8 years since things like Twitter really took off, where the whole Newcastle fan base, particularly on Twitter, was so toxic that it is really refreshing to see these feel-good stories and these direct interactions that are civil and engaging and warm, and actually add something, because you know that the people running your football club now have actually got a genuine vested interest. And so far, they've not hidden away when the team haven't performed. They've tried to give insight and be an active presence, and, as you've said, even privately help the fan base as well where they can. They're not going to be able to tell the fans about everything, and the more stories that come about Newcastle and the more people talk about finances and the more success the club gets, the bigger the club gets. And then at that point, the fans that have engaged with them once are going to be inboxing them or tweeting them and saying, well, why are you not telling us about the new sponsor? Why are you not telling us about the finances? So it is a sort of tricky line for them to kind of define, because it's a hungry fan base. But I think that it's also an intelligent fan base. So they do realize that just because Jamie Rubin tweets back and says, congratulations on your fundraising food bank, or just because they apologize for a bad result or show you inside the dressing room, that doesn't mean that they're going to reveal who the new sponsor is publicly or privately before it's time. And I think that as long as fans realise that social media is both a window in, but also a barrier, and sometimes it's authentic and sometimes it's staged, then they'll get on very well with this ownership group.
Yeah, the social media campaign against Newcastle has been evident throughout the takeover attempt, and now the takeover's gone through. We've seen some interesting stuff develop again. Do you think that'll ever die down? I mean, obviously the Newcastle takeover went through, a ludicrous amount of time for it to go through. Now we have a situation which has developed with Chelsea through the war in Ukraine, which has seen, potentially, new owners come in. By the time this goes out, they may well have been announced. We may well have new owners in, but the social media attacks again on Newcastle, certain people in the media attacking Newcastle. Do you think that will ever die down, or do you think it will take maybe PIF to come out and speak at some point to show that transparency that you're saying, for that to be all, moved on and leveled off?
I think PIF have to come out and say something, but they're in a very difficult position because they are still PIF. So in the context of Newcastle, they may be separate from the government, at least in the eyes of the Premier League or legally, but they are still PIF, and their whole board is still royally decreed government ministers. So they can't really come out and say too much that's out of line with the government messaging, which means that this will never really die down until we see tangible and positive change around diversion, around inclusivity, around human rights issues in Saudi Arabia. And if Saudi Arabia develops a better reputation, then PIF can come forwards and shout and scream about that. And if Saudi Arabia continue to have huge question marks around these areas, then PIF remaining silent will only fuel the fire. So the only way currently that they can stop it is for Newcastle to come out as a football club, which would be perceived to be a PIF statement, even if it was Staveley or the Rubins, and potentially condemn something that's going on in Saudi Arabia. But I just don't see that happening because it would naturally cause friction. So I think that PIF will remain silent on these issues, or if they speak, they will talk about improvements in Saudi Arabia, and then some people will applaud them for that, and others will say that it's not genuine and more needs to be done. And as long as you have media and all types of media from all parts of the world, and as long as you have politicians, and as long as you have human rights groups like Amnesty International, Saudi Arabia will continue to be criticized, and a lot of that criticism is fair, and therefore Newcastle United will continue to be criticized. And I think that, annoyingly, and it's not just Newcastle here that I'm talking about, what you find is that as time passes, everyone becomes blasé about it, in the same way that until the war in Ukraine started, people sort of forgot about Abramovich and his links with Putin, and to some extent the Qatar World Cup, since the day that they've won it, has rightly been accused of needing improvement as a country in lots of different areas, because women don't feel comfortable potentially going over there. There's improvement needed to make it more inclusive as far as the LGBTQ plus community is concerned. There's been a reported 6,500 migrant worker deaths. But so much time has passed that even though people continue to criticize it, Qatar have got no worry about being stripped of a World Cup. Of course not now, because we're only months away, but they had no concerns about losing that World Cup even 5 years ago, because so much time has passed since they've won the vote that they've just got used to the criticism. And that's why I use the word annoyance, because that's what will happen with Newcastle as well, that eventually, whether there's transparency or not, everyone will just get used to it, that Newcastle United have got Saudi Arabian owners. And that might mean that it dies down, or it might mean that the stories just come out and get brushed off a bit more than they are currently. And that doesn't really help anyone, because it just means that the Newcastle United fan base and club remain annoyed that someone is targeting them and constantly tying them to Saudi Arabia. But over time, we're blasé about it and we just brush it off. And it means that from the perspective of the people writing the stories, there's no comment, there's no response. So it makes them even more determined to keep writing and keep prodding and keep pushing, and we don't get any resolution. And the whole point here is this, that everyone here should be on the same page. Newcastle United should want to be a vehicle for positive change in Saudi Arabia due to their ownership group. PIF should want to showcase positive change in Saudi Arabia and should hopefully believe that that change is genuine. And the government of Saudi Arabia should be backing them on that as part of Vision 2030. And the media should want access to see and judge whether that change is genuine. And if you look at it in those terms, then everything should be moving towards more transparency. But we probably won't get that because Saudi Arabia are also aware that they can't just rewrite their past. So it's all very well PIF saying there's a lot of positive change, and they may be right about that. It's all very well the Newcastle fan base saying, of course, things are moving in the right direction. And again, they may be right about that. But as a journalist, I can't just only look at the change without asking why they've not been accountable for the past. And that's what sports washing is. It's not just about using sport for soft power. It's also about rewriting your past. And even if the present is moving in the right direction, and again, it may well be. So I'm not saying when Newcastle United or PIF do come forwards and talk about something positive that they are wrong to do that. I'm just saying, you know, I can't just punch you in the face, Steve. Not that I ever would, of course. And then 10 minutes later say, oh, I've reformed myself and I've started a new program and I'd like to talk about the new program, never to punch Steve Wraith in the face again. But if at no point have I apologized for punching you in the face or accepted that that's what I did in the first place, then do I really just have the right to only talk about what I'm doing to improve myself without acknowledging my mistake in the first place? And that's the kind of friction between media, PIF, Saudi government, and the football club that as a journalist, I'm quite prepared to listen to PIF through Newcastle or the government separate from Newcastle if they want to tell me what they're doing to improve things in their country. But I still want to ask them about their past. And unless that past is addressed, I don't think PIF will be particularly open through Newcastle United about any of this.
Yeah, okay, great stuff. We'll give a shout out to our sponsors. Give Ben time to get a glass of water. Spider VPN, thank you very much as always for your sponsorship for all your internet security. Google Spider VPN. They are the boys to trust. Thanks to skipsandbins.com, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website www.skipsandbins.com. Easy, contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks to L&G Family Funeral Directors, 01913897245. And to Garden of Healing Dispensary, CBD Hemp and Cannabinoid Specialists, www.thegohd.com. Thanks to Arcot Interiors, based on Heaton Road in Newcastle, the guys to trust for kitchen interiors. You can Google them as well. They come up at the top of the search list. And thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com. Thanks to Cleekai. Meet the new Game Over screen. Drop into a Clearun device near you. Available on Apple Store, Google Play, and clearun.game. Check out Jab Signature at jabsignature.co.uk. And thanks to Media Art for their help with videos. And if you want to subscribe, hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right-hand corner to subscribe for free. Still do 7 shows a week and a few extra besides. Hit the thumb up to like the channel. Click share to share to your social media. And drop into the comments box to speak to like-minded Newcastle fans. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast providers. Usually goes up 24 hours after the show has finished. Scan over the QR code as well to go straight to the website. That takes you to the members part of the website. You get a scarf, a cup, and a pen, and a membership card, and entry into the monthly draw for a one-off fee. So go to NUFCmatters.com to register. And if you're just a subscriber, somebody who just subscribes and likes to watch the content, you can get a free car sticker. All you need to do is go to the website again, NUFCmatters.com, to get your free car sticker. We're also supportive of the food bank on here, NUFC fans, foodbank.co.uk. And with Rishi Sunak not doing us any favours whatsoever and things going from bad to worse on the home front, sadly, more and more people are reliant on food banks. And food banks up and down the country struggling at the moment as well because of everything being hit in the pot. Everybody being hit in the pocket. Donations are becoming less and less. So even if you can put 20 pence in, or £2 or £20, whatever you can put in, please put it into the food bank. Because it all goes directly to them and helps out a great cause. We're last shout for this one, and me, Holly, Malcolm and Gibbo will be at the Marlborough Social on Saturday the 9th of April. Tickets are £10, newcastlelegends.com for your tickets for that. And the Alan Shearer raffle is still ongoing. Win 2 tickets for the draw, 99.1 chance of winning 2 VIP tickets for that event. Go to NUFCmatters.com. And if you want to buy tickets direct for that event, just go to 260dinner.co.uk. That one will be an event well worth going to. Liam Kennedy, of course, asking Alan Shearer the questions. Okay, let's move on from the owners to the manager. First of all, Eddie Howe, it was a shock, I think, to some, not a shock to others. He had a little bit of time away from the game. He's come back. He's had time to think and, mull over what his next steps would be in his next job. And didn't get off to the best of starts. But boy, when he hit the ground running, did he hit the ground running? So overall, what's your assessment of Eddie Howe's Newcastle United career so far?
I think he's been excellent, and the philosophy that he brings is very much in tune with the club and the fan base. He's personable. He is in control on the training field and of that dressing room. So he's been allowed that kind of freedom to bring in his kind of people and sign types of players that suit his style and system. And I just think that the passion that he's displayed is very much welcomed by Newcastle United. There was always a danger to begin with that it would be tough to bed in because Newcastle had quite a thin squad. They'd come off the back of quite a severe COVID outbreak. Injuries had played a part. And then you're walking into a team that ultimately was rock bottom. So I think anyone that thought there was just going to be an instant response were always probably being too ambitious. And then you look at the kind of first few matches when he was bedded in, and as you rightly say, they really were disappointing. The draw against Norwich looked like being significant and damning for Newcastle as far as relegation was concerned. The win against Burnley was obviously massive, but it was nervy and they didn't play particularly well. They got absolutely battered against Leicester, but everybody loses to Leicester. So perhaps we can just brush over that one. But I think that there are a few kind of key turning points. And oddly, the biggest one of all was not a win or a good performance, but it was the loss to Cambridge, because I think that at that point on January the 8th, every single person at Newcastle got together behind closed doors. And I think Howe effectively just gave everybody a big kick and made it clear to his players that, with due respect to Cambridge, who played excellent in that game, if you don't turn things around right now, you're going to be playing teams of Cambridge's ilk next season. And obviously the Championship is a little bit stronger than Cambridge United, but you're going to have that drop in standard and you're going to have that level of criticism and you're letting everybody down. And I think that they went away and they learned a lot of lessons from Cambridge United. And as I understand it, Howe questioned a couple of things. The starting games, which was always the thing under Kevin Keegan as well, that, your task is not necessarily to score in the first 15 minutes, although naturally every team wants to, but your task is to set the tone in that first 15 minutes and to show the crowd that you mean business, to show the fan base that you're hungry and that the energy levels are up and that, every game matters regardless of circumstance, because this is a loyal fan base that pay hard-earned money. And I think Howe re-emphasized that. And I also think that he made it abundantly clear on January the 8th that fresh blood would be coming in. And that fresh blood would put everyone at the football club under scrutiny, and it would cause more competition for places. And I just think after that, everyone upped their game. And, you know, the result after Cambridge against Watford was also very poor. So you're suddenly looking at a 1-1 draw against Watford, 1-1 draw against Norwich, and you're thinking, oh, we're in big trouble. But then from there onwards, you just can't fault Newcastle United. I mean, the win at Leeds was massive. The victory over Everton at home was big. The ground out win over Villa was impressive. And I feel like it could have been more. They didn't kill the game off, but it was a very good hour or so in that match. The away draw against West Ham was quite the opposite to the other two 1-1 draws that I mentioned. It was a superb performance. The victory against Brentford was hugely important, even though they had that early red card. That was perhaps the kind of game that Newcastle United 3 months earlier, even against 10 men, wouldn't have won. And then they go and beat Brighton and they find themselves basically safe. And then actually, I was probably most impressed, which tells you how they're kind of going on an upward curve, by the next two games. So the away win against Southampton for me was really important because they fell behind. Chris Wood got his first goal for the club. Bruno scored a worldie in his first Premier League start. But it was the manner in which they came back in that game on the road, the fight, the hunger, they were clinical. That was a really defining win for me. And then they followed it up with Chelsea, and okay, they lost it in the last minute, but for 90 minutes effectively, again, away from home, they really ground something out. And what that shows me about Howe is that he's actually developed a very strong away team. And when you know that Newcastle are going to get points at home because of how intimidating St James's Park can be, and then when you add to that their tactics away from home are going to be gritty, hungry, counter-attacking, not too negative, balanced, structured, all qualities that I think Howe's brought. When you see what they can do now away from home, and then when you add the kind of leadership of a Burn, when you know that Joe Linton, when fit, is going to be able to dominate a midfield, when you know that Bruno can come in and be a real fan favourite, when you know that Wood can hold up the ball, and you've still got a Wilson and a St Maximin and a Trippier to kind of come back and all be fully fit together. And again, there'll be good players, those three that I've mentioned, away from home in particular, where they can really gain you something out of nothing with pace on the counter-attack and be clinical. So what I'm seeing from Howe is a different philosophy, a more attacking philosophy. He's kind of sorted out how to use St James's Park as a weapon, and the fan base have obviously helped, but it's away from home that I'm most impressed with Howe, because instead of Newcastle United now turning up on the road and just flopping and sitting deep and surrendering possession and handing over points for free with no plan, with no structure, and with no kind of fight, what we're seeing on the road now is them showing a lot less respect to teams and having a lot more of a plan. And that's been the biggest change for me. And when Newcastle United can pick points up on the road and have that home advantage, there's absolutely no reason why next season they won't find themselves comfortably in the top 8 in the Premier League, if not even further up in the table.
How do you think he's dealt with the press and the questions, again, regarding Saudi ownership?
He, like Thomas Tuchel, has at times tried to be quite amenable to it and open to giving an answer, but it is also clear he's getting sick and tired of the questioning. And his line has repeatedly been, I'm a football manager, I'm here to do a football job. And you would expect him to give that answer, I suppose, but these questions are not going to go away. And coming back to the previous discussion we had about PIF, if PIF are not prepared to come forwards and be the voice of these questions, much like Abramovich wasn't at Chelsea, it's going to fall on the manager, because that's the media's easiest access when they want to raise these issues. So I think that Howe and every football manager needs to educate himself on the issues to have a more defined position. Because I think what the war in Ukraine will do is it will make football more politicized, and it will give more scope to individuals to protest and say what they think. And you see a lot more of this in US sport. So before the war in Ukraine, it was very much like football's a mediator, football promotes peace, football doesn't really do politics. And if you wanted to have an individual protest, you were fined for doing that. But now, since the pandemic, we've moved into a phase where football clubs try and be a little bit political, but they do it in a unified way. And I think that the final phase post the war in Russia or during the war in Russia will be that there'll be an appreciation that individuals can protest, not willy-nilly as they see fit, but more than ever before. And the fines or the barriers that prevented you from doing that in the past will be lowered to some extent, which means that if you're Eddie Howe now, you can't just sort of say sport is sport, because we're painting the opposite messaging, rightly so, during the war in Ukraine. The sport is more than just sport, and football is a vehicle to promote peace and positive change. So I think that if there's 81 beheadings in Saudi Arabia, even if Howe doesn't have an opinion on that, and even if he thinks that other people need to be asked about that, he still has to clue up on that and reference that and acknowledge that and apologize for that or show empathy for that. Not on behalf of the football club and not on behalf of PIF, but I think gone are the days where you can just brush it off and say, I've made my position clear, I'm a football manager. And he is a football manager. But as more and more things happen, he still has to say, it's horrific. He can acknowledge it's not his remit. He can acknowledge that he respects the question because he realizes that the ownership group is Saudi Arabian, and he can show empathy. Beyond that, there's not much more he can do. But he has to, I think, still have that empathy rather than that irritation. And we saw Tuchel get more and more irritated by the questioning at Chelsea. The media are going to bait Eddie Howe, so he has to be prepared for that. But I think that his only shortcomings in dealing with the media are that he's played it very straight back, very bland, very football-y. And yet Newcastle, at the point when he was asked about some of these things, had already been to Saudi Arabia. So what I'd like to see Howe do more of is give the counterpoint. Because Newcastle fans watching this will be shouting and saying, damn it, it's a pre-record. I really wanted to slag him off. And I'm not saying that Howe has to kind of be the voice of Saudi Arabia. Quite the opposite. He can brush it off just by showing empathy. But what I am saying is if he's been to Saudi Arabia, he's in a unique position now because both the media and the Newcastle fan base at large haven't. So what I want Howe to start doing is saying, well, I've been to Saudi Arabia. Here's what I've seen. So if somebody asked him about the culture there, he doesn't have to respond directly, but he can explain what he saw when he was there. If someone asked him about the human rights, he can explain what he saw when he was there. Because I've been to Saudi Arabia and I've seen plenty of women who feel empowered there now, especially since the ban against driving was lifted. I know people in Saudi Arabia that are part of underground LGBTQ plus communities. I know people in Saudi Arabia that are Western employees, including working for PIF, that have spent the last decade trying desperately to change the culture and improve things there. So I'm not saying Saudi Arabia isn't without change, but if you have a day when there's 81 beheadings, then Howe can't just brush that off. He has to show empathy to the fact that 81 humans lost their lives. And then if he can, try and give a bit of insight from his own time there, rather than only say he's a football manager. Because if he keeps only saying he's a football manager, over time, he looks a bit naive to the situation.
Okay, interesting. Right, last 20 minutes, let's talk about the players. Newcastle did some rather interesting business in January, and probably, I would dare say, the best January we've had in the last 14 years. But let's start with Kieran Trippier first, an England international. Obviously, someone who has taken to the field, for Newcastle only on a few occasions, but seems to be doing so much behind the scenes and in the dressing room, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I said when he joined that it was a marquee signing, and I think a lot of people question that. But for Newcastle United to get a La Liga winner and England international when they had one win and were rock bottom of the table was absolutely astonishing. And on the field before the injury, he proved his worth with a couple of free kicks, and also his general set piece delivery and organisation and leadership. And a lot of people will talk about the goals, but I actually singled out the Leeds United performance for the reason that he had a poor first half or hour against Jack Harrison in particular, and he adjusted. And that's the sign again of a quality player who realizes how they're being bullied and dominated and outplayed, and adjusts before any damage was done. And again, that shows you his intelligence, his quality, along with his set piece delivery. And then off the field, he's really bedded himself into Northeast culture and developed an affinity with the fan base and been a visible presence in the dressing room and at games as well, even during the injury. And I use the word again, there's that hunger and there's that desire and there's that fight. And you could say, well, player of his age, having been in the sun in Spain, won a La Liga title, England international, you could say, where's the logic in joining Newcastle? And that's when certain more cynical people will say, well, it's just the money and it's the lure and it's a payday, but it clearly isn't. And I think he has got the bit between his teeth to come back to England and be part of something from the very ground level and take Newcastle as far as he possibly can. And I think he's a flagship signing and a quality personality and a leader and someone that's just raised the level of everyone at Newcastle United Football Club on and off the field. So great signing, unfortunate injury, but just a valuable asset to Newcastle United going forward.
Okay, Chris Wood, obviously Newcastle's much maligned problems up front, indicate really with the injury that we got to Callum Wilson. It was something that people, Newcastle fans, dreaded, losing Callum Wilson, and they made a move in January. They brought Chris Wood. What's your views on how he's done?
Sensible signing, short-term signing, a lot of money, but an area that Newcastle, because of the reason you've just alluded to, needed to strengthen him. And I think that he's got a goal now. He's proven he can kind of hold the ball up. He adds depth. And to a large degree, he was the perfect signing for a team in Newcastle's position at the time that he was acquired. The irony is because they found form and strung together results long before the stretch to the season, he's almost redundant now. And I think that's the only question mark, that as Wilson gets fit or Newcastle wind down their season probably safe at the time we're speaking, I think they need 3 points maximum. And I see them getting that long before the tricky final 4 or 5 games, including what everyone thought would be a season ender at Wood's former club Burnley. But Newcastle will be nowhere near relegation by the time that game comes along, and Burnley will probably be down. So Wood's almost just playing games with far less at stake than he perhaps thought when he joined the football club. And then Newcastle, I think, will go into the next window and put Wood further down the pecking order, and Wilson will be fit. And that's why I say that for the amount of money they spent, his place at the football club might just be as a bit part player or redundant. And in that respect, I feel a bit sorry for him, because I think he was coming in and really trying to get goals and get involved and fire Newcastle up the table. But they found a way of doing that before he really had an impact. So I'm delighted to see him getting his goal. And from a personal perspective now, he's kind of got a big decision to make, because, New Zealand are trying to qualify for a World Cup, which will be in the middle of next season. And come what may, Chris Wood will be selected in that because he's one of the Kiwis' flagship players. But before they potentially get there, he will have to have regular game time because he wants to be at his peak to try and take them to Qatar. And because Australia have left Oceania for the AFC, New Zealand will cruise into the Confederation playoff. They'll play the Solomon Islands, they'll beat the Solomon Islands, and then they'll come up against an intercontinental playoff team. And that will be somebody from the CONCACAF region, probably a Panama or a Costa Rica. And Wood will want to be at his peak for that, playing regular football and make sure that he stands the best possible chance of sending New Zealand to a World Cup. And I think that will be his priority. And is Newcastle United the right football club for him in the long run after the season finishes to get that regular game time? And unfortunately, I don't think it is. So I think that the short answer to your question, not that I ever give a short answer, is that Chris Wood was a good, sensible short-term signing, but he's almost not needed now, and he will be replaced or at least pushed down the pecking order in the next transfer window. And he'll be pushed down the pecking order anyway when Wilson is fit.
Okay, Bruno Guimaraes. I mean, you know, a midfield player. I think the last time you were on the show, you talked about Bruno being a next phase player.
Yeah, and I still think that. And obviously, a fit Joe Linton will keep him out of the side. I don't really see tactically at the moment them playing too many games together necessarily, although it is possible. But he needs a bit of development. So he's naturally become a fan's favourite. And I think sometimes when you arrive with a bit of cult status and then you instantly add to the cult status with a backheel volley goal on your first Premier League start, you kind of embed yourself very early into legend. And he's also clearly very open on social media and very aware of the club's culture and history. So that's all very positive. But I do think he needs a bit of development. So the positives are he's high energy, he's box to box, he's a tenacious tackler. He's not actually that much of a goal scorer, but the more he develops that box to box aspect and is encouraged to break forwards, the more chance he'll have of scoring in the Premier League. And I think he just enjoys the tempo as well of how Newcastle play and the directness and of Premier League football. But the areas where he needs to improve is a bit more coolness, a bit more discipline, and maybe having a bit more care on the ball. So if you actually watch back the game against Southampton, then everyone will focus on the goal. But look at it before the goal, and he gave the ball away quite a lot in central midfield quite cheaply. And Southampton didn't really capitalise on that as much as maybe other teams would. So I just think that over time, he will finesse his raw talent a bit and develop a bit more calmness on the ball. And then the sky's the limit. So I think, you know, he's a signing that Newcastle fans can be really excited about because he's got all of the assets to be a really strong player and a fan's favourite for Newcastle. But I would just like to see him do some of the basics a little bit better. Otherwise, before he gets to his full potential, he may come under a bit more criticism if in games he ends up, you know, gifting the opposition possession in midfield or being a bit rash and then getting punished for it. We haven't seen it yet, but there were definitely a few warning signs before his incredible goal against Southampton.
I suppose the surprise of the transfer window was Matt Targett, and you know, a player of the year, of course, at his parent club Aston Villa, a loan signing, but one with, by the sounds of it, an option to buy and a snip, I would say, at 15 million.
Yeah, there's an option to buy, and he is very controlled on the ball. He's very versatile. He's very much a team player. Loves to get forward on the overlap, has got a good delivery, holds in a back four well, can play in a kind of back three, in a five-man midfield if necessary. And I just think that it's another signal of Newcastle's intent to, as you say, get a player of the year, to negotiate an option to buy. And I think that he has almost been forgotten within who was signed in the transfer window because there was so much excitement about Trippier and he scored. There was a high transfer fee around Wood and he's a striker. So there's always going to be talk around someone like him. Dan Burn, cult status, started really well. Lots of photographs and fun around that. And Bruno, the Brazilian. But I actually think that Targett is, again, a very Eddie Howe player because Howe especially as I alluded to before, away from home, wants players that can get from defence quickly, wants players that see a long diagonal ball and can hit it instinctively, wants players that can win first balls and then immediately get the ball forwards on the ground directly, wants players that see a counter-attack and have got that stamina to get from the back to the front, wants players that are not afraid to kind of go in for second balls, even if in doing so they're pulled out of position. And I think that Targett ticks a lot of those boxes and is just a very shrewd signing.
100%, great signing, and those players have certainly helped get Newcastle United clear of the relegation zone. So the next question I'm going to ask you is, Ben, you mentioned it earlier, you think Newcastle are only one win away from safety?
Yeah, I think they're only one win away from safety, and the reason for that is because if you look at the Premier League table at the time we're speaking anyway, you've got Watford on 22. They're not getting 12 points from their remaining 9 games. And then Norwich are goners, and they're certainly not catching Newcastle United anyway. So the only real question is Burnley, because of the games in hand. And are Burnley going to win 2 games in hand? And let's say hypothetically, even though it doesn't work like this, they were to just play their 2 games in hand before Newcastle get any other points or play another 90 minutes, then hypothetically, if they're on the same number of games as Newcastle and they won 2 games in hand, then they find themselves moving to 27 points, which means that you then have Watford second bottom and Everton are on 25 points, and they've also got 2 games in hand. So you could make a scenario where if Everton and Burnley pick up points in their games in hand, then things start to tighten a little bit and the gap between Newcastle and relegation isn't maybe as big as you think. But I just don't see Burnley getting 6 points from their games in hand. And I think that Everton, despite the win over Newcastle, are moving in the wrong direction. So I think it's 3 points for Newcastle United. I reckon that the 34-point mark will be enough for safety, especially when you consider that if Newcastle get to 34 points, they'll again improve their goal difference, and they've got a better goal difference than Norwich. They've got a similar goal difference to Burnley. They've got a much better goal difference to Watford. They've got a much better goal difference to Leeds. They've got a mildly better goal difference to Everton. But again, if they get 3 more points, it will improve further. So 34 points might end up almost being like 35 points because of the goal difference. I think that's absolutely plenty. And then when you see Newcastle United's fixtures, it's the run of home games that's going to be really key. So after the international break, away at Tottenham is obviously tough. But then you got home to Wolves, home to Leicester, home to Palace. Wolves are in good form. Leicester aren't, despite my joke earlier, and Crystal Palace at home. If you don't get results in those 2, I'm sure you take something from that game. And then even if 3 consecutive home games were lost, the one after that is away at Norwich. So Newcastle are blessed in that respect, because take Spurs out the equation, and then to have 3 consecutive home games plus an away trip to Norwich, who will probably be relegated at that point, 3 points from those 4 games. And I would be staggered if Newcastle don't get 3 points from those 4 games that I mentioned. If you don't, and then things tighten, that's when there's a massive problem, because then, of course, it's Liverpool, Manchester City, Arsenal, and the last thing you want to do is go away at Turf Moor on the final game of the season. But I think that the latest Newcastle United will be mathematically safe by is April the 23rd away at Norwich City. And if I make sort of predictions, not that I ever like to do this, I see away at Tottenham as being a loss. I see home to Wolves as being a draw. I see home to Leicester as being a 5-0 win to Leicester. And I'm not going to give you my actual prediction. We're just going to put that as a 0 for the hell of it. But obviously it is a very winnable game for Newcastle United. And I see home to Crystal Palace as being 3 points for Newcastle. So worst case scenario, I think by April the 20th, Newcastle will have 4 points. And the truth is that if you lose to Wolves and don't beat Palace, I honestly think that you probably do beat Leicester at St James's Park. So I would be very, very surprised if by April the 20th, Newcastle don't have another 4 points and then away at Norwich, you take at least a point from that game anyway, which means that even in a worst case scenario, Newcastle are comfortably beyond 34 points. They're probably at 35, 36. They're, in my opinion, finishing the season with 40 or so points. And I think they're safe by the middle of April. Great
stuff. Okay, I guess the last question I'm going to ask you is not one you can necessarily answer, but you can give an opinion. Is, some journalists have gone out on a limb, said Newcastle aren't going to spend as much money as fans are hoping for in the summer. What kind of transfer window do you think Newcastle United will have this summer?
I don't really think it's about the money. I think it's about the value. I think anyone telling you what Newcastle will and won't spend are not working within the reality of the situation. They had to spend a lot in January because urgent signings were needed to keep the team up. The reason why the signings are sensible is because they've tried where possible, with the exception of Wood, to gain a spine that they think can build towards next season. And that's why they might end up spending a little bit less, because you don't need a Trippier or a Targett replacement. They've got Bruno in, which adds depth. Joe Linton is in form. They're factoring in some of the injured players coming back, like St. Maximin, Wilson, and obviously eventually Trippier himself. So there's a spine there. So the last thing you want to do is overbuy just for the sake of it. So Newcastle will only bring in players, in my opinion, who genuinely add to the squad in terms of starters and depth. They don't need as much of an overhaul as perhaps people thought they would in January. But it's not really about the amount. So if one person is saying they're going to spend less than 100 million and another person is going to say they'll spend 250 million on Haaland or an Mbappe, it's all nonsense, because the market is about value and opportunism. So if Newcastle see value, as long as it's within financial fair play, they'll spend. And if Newcastle see opportunism for some box office name that adds to their squad, and again, it's within financial fair play and their financial means, they'll spend. And 50% of a window is about forward planning, where they'll try and be strategic and not make rash signings. And 50% is about what happens in the off season, where there's a lot of merry-go-round movement, and then players might become available. So I think that, as I understand it, it's not really about putting a number on it, and it's not really about putting specific names on it per se. It's about saying, what areas do we need to strengthen in? And for me, there's probably three key areas at the moment. Area number one is goalkeeper. Area number two is still a centre-back. And area number three is the centre-forward. And I think you'll see them signing 3 players in January, maybe not any more than that. So it's about quality, not quantity. And those 3 players, in terms of how much, will depend on who's available in the market. So of course, if they can keep their spending under 100 million and bring in those 3 names, they probably will. And, when you sign a goalkeeper and you sign a defender, you can often get world-class players for under 25 million each. So even if they spent 25 million on a keeper, 25 million on a centre-back, and I think you'd get someone relatively strong for that. Trippier proves that, and goalkeepers don't tend to come with that same value. So I'm not saying these are the players that they'll sign, but, even if you wanted like a Jan Oblak, you're probably getting him for 25 million or under. And Trippier was 25 million and under. So it wouldn't surprise me if they spent 50 odd million on a goalkeeper and a defender, and then maybe they go for a striker for 50 million. But if a Yuri Tielemans comes up in an opportunistic way on top of that for 75 million, or if a Mbappe, not that I think that's remotely realistic, comes up for 200 million and they think, well, this is worth it, I think they'll act in an opportunistic way. So, I think you're looking at 3 names and sensible names for sensible money. However, I think there's almost like I don't know how old the audience will be here, but if you ever played Monopoly as a kid and you were like me, you would cheat and you would have a little secret savings that you'd take from the bank, and you'd put it under your bum and you'd sit on it. And just when someone thought you were bankrupt, you'd pull it out. And it wouldn't surprise me if Newcastle have got that sort of dual budget of what they want to spend and what they think they're going to spend, which might be a bit more modest, and then the secret savings. And it wouldn't remotely surprise me if the right opportunity comes around and they can bolster their planned transfer budget for the summer by spending a bit more. It wouldn't surprise me if there's that flexibility, which gives Howe and Dan Ashworth the sort of perfect position to be in, because they're kind of working to amount A to begin with. But if something opportunistic comes up for an amount B, the beauty of the current ownership group is they have that ability to spend a bit more. And I don't think they're just going to say, no, this is your fixed final amount. So anyone sort of reporting that and saying it's only going to be this amount is maybe looking at it in too much of a black and white way, because I don't think that's the strategy of the football club. And I don't think that's how a January transfer window works. A January transfer window works with your planned acquisitions and then merry-go-rounds and last-minute things based on who moves where and who signs what, which is more apparent in the summer than a January window. And at that point, I think Newcastle are going to have to be quite quick in the market. And that's where their financial power might get them someone unexpected or more last minute that's not part of the strategy. But again, I think right now, if I was to predict, I would say goalkeeper, defender, striker for probably 100 million or less.
Fantastic, Ben. As always, a wonderful hour spent in your company, mate. I will let you crack on. Thanks for coming on, mate, and I'm sure we'll get you on towards the end of the season and might see you for the Leicester game as well. So take care, mate.
To come up to Newcastle for the Leicester game and see us win, and always a pleasure.
Take care, mate. Bye-bye.
Cheers, bye.